So the origin of Apocalypse is given to us in the story Rise of Apocalypse. Written by Terry Kavanagh and drawn by Adam Polina, the story opens with Apocalypse as he was discovered by a group of nomads called the Sandstormers. With the tribe led by a man named Baal, Apocalypse, after having been found abandoned by his former tribe, was given the name Ensaba Nur. While the real-world translation in various languages comes out to be some variation of the Morning Light, in Marvel Comics the name means the First One. Continuing with the story, the philosophy of the Sandstormers, as it had been passed down for generations, was akin to the Spartans in that only the strongest were fit to be part of their society. The philosophy of the Sandstormers became an ingrained part of Apocalypse in that the story jumps forward to his rite of passage. As part of the Sandstormers' belief in the survival of the fittest, the young men of the group would engage in a battle to the death on their 17th birthday as a means to prove their role in the tribe. Those who survived were forged in battle, and those who died were considered a weakness, one that would have spread to the tribe had they been allowed to live. While Apocalypse's physical appearance was shunned by many of the young men that were raised alongside him, this combined with Baal's clear favoritism shown towards Apocalypse garnered him a great deal of jealousy and hatred. And so when the battle began, rather than it being every man for himself, it was all of the young men versus Apocalypse. Without hesitation and without mercy, Apocalypse demonstrates both cunning and proficiency in cutting down his fellow tribesmen. As a result, with his role in the tribe established, Baal leads Apocalypse to a hidden cavern where we learn both Baal's reason for adopting Apocalypse as well as a bit of history involving the Sandstormers. At some point in the past, the Sandstormers existed as a clan that was large in numbers. During this time, a ship in the form of a sphinx appeared in the sky and crash landed with a piece breaking off. Investigating the severed section of the ship and finding a survivor, the Sandstormers took him in and nursed him back to health. However, once he was restored, the visitor, who is revealed to have been the time-traveling villain Cain the Conqueror, used his advanced weapons to conquer Egypt, place himself in the position of Pharaoh, and enslave the Sandstormers. However, with the location of his ship lost to him, Cain tortured the Sandstormers for this information, but when none of them revealed its location, Cain ordered their executions, and while most of the Sandstormers were killed, some of them were able to escape. And so with Baal established as their leader, the survivors roamed the lands of Egypt, constantly avoiding Cain's watchful eye. What Baal also reveals is that among the various inscriptions in the tomb is the face of Apocalypse himself. Apocalypse reasons that if his own face is among the various hieroglyphics carved into the ship, then it stands to reason that Cain seeks to capture him for his own ends. While this is largely speculation on behalf of Apocalypse, his guesswork is proven to be correct when Cain sends his generals and armies to the location of the Sandstorm camp. With Apocalypse and Baal away, the arrival of Cain's army results in a massive battle, one which results in the deaths of everyone fighting. Furthermore, the battle above causes a massive cave-in, leaving Apocalypse and Baal trapped inside. And so as the weeks pass, while Apocalypse demonstrates a lack of need for food and water, Baal does not. And so after Baal succumbs to death due to starvation and thirst, Apocalypse swears vengeance against Cain and is ultimately able to break himself out of the cavern. From here, the story transitions to Apocalypse working as a slave. During one of his work sessions, he takes a break while pondering his actions and his intention of killing Cain. As a result, he draws the attention of Cain's top general, a man named Ozymandias. When Apocalypse addresses Ozymandias by name, he's actually kicked from the top of the pyramid as a punishment, with the expectation that he will end up dying. However, Apocalypse has a vision of the sun goddess Isis, who informs him that he's actually meant for a greater destiny than to be a slave to men, and in the process bestows him with a vast amount of power. Now, whether this is actually the goddess Isis or an illusion is never truly made clear, but I would go as far as to argue that this is simply a mental manifestation of Apocalypse's abilities regarding telepathy, telekinesis, flight, strength, and immortality. Now, while his demonstration of his powers inspire the other slaves to attempt an uprising, Ozymandias and his forces are actually able to quell the rebels but are distracted by another incident which allows Apocalypse to be taken to safety under the care of Nefri, the sister of Ozymandias. As time passes, while Apocalypse never reveals his face to Nefri, in addition to his efforts in showing her the various secrets of Cain the Conqueror, as well as proof that Cain is actually a time traveler, he also begins to develop a romantic interest in her. But when their various quests lead them directly into a trap set up by Ozymandias and Cain, the face of Apocalypse is forcefully revealed, where he's actually shunned by Nefri for his physical appearance. As a result, while he does try to fight against Cain and Ozymandias, he's overwhelmed by Kang's advanced weapons, and so he's presumably executed. However, Apocalypse doesn't actually die here, and instead, he makes an effort to rescue Nefri from her imprisonment. But much like the Sandstormer tribe and the various slaves he had encountered over the course of his life, Nefri is unable to cope with Apocalypse's physical appearance, and as a result, believing himself to be destined and alone, Apocalypse lashes out, starting a conquest from the royal lands in Egypt and killing all those of royal blood. Now, in the panic of the conflict, Kang the Conqueror flees back to his own time, and Ozymandias tries to escape by taking refuge in what's left of Kang's ship. But when Apocalypse arrives after having harnessed his new abilities, he uses his vast powers to enslave Ozymandias, turning him into stone and forcing him to operate as a scribe and oracle for the rest of eternity. So following Apocalypse's rise in Egypt, he begins traveling throughout the world, encountering a vast amount of primitive societies. With the Sandstormer's philosophy of survival of the fittest as his mantra, Apocalypse forces these various societies against one another in an effort to prove which civilization is stronger, and by extension, destroying what he perceives to be the weak civilizations. For this reason, throughout the Marvel Universe, in dealing with most ancient Earthbound societies like the Inhumans, virtually all religions at some point or another indicate the worship or acknowledgement of some variation of Apocalypse. However, during his travels, he comes into contact with a celestial ship. While a time frame's not really given here, what we're told is that Apocalypse is given an offer by the Celestials. Apocalypse can use their vast technology for his own ends, but at some point in the future, a repayment will be required which may cost his life or perhaps even more. The other half of this is that Apocalypse can refuse their offer and never gain access to their technology. Choosing to accept, Apocalypse begins the process of trying to communicate with the celestial ship over the course of several years. Now, during this time, there eventually comes a point at which Apocalypse is met with the arrival of a being that's referred to as the Traveler. Now, while the identity of this person isn't initially revealed during their first encounter, the Traveler is later revealed to be Cable. While the paradox as it exists between both Cable and Apocalypse has been explored in other videos that I've made, in that the future actions of Apocalypse lead to Cable's appearance in the past, their battle leads to Apocalypse gaining access to celestial technology by way of Cable's own blood. Now, using this augmented ability, Apocalypse is able to interact directly with the ship, allowing him to augment himself, granting a whole new plethora of abilities, including the power to alter his own atomic structure, as well as use any physical superhuman power. With these new abilities, Apocalypse once again continues his quest to promote strong individuals and societies. As an example, in 1039 AD, he encountered the thunder god Thor. While Thor is not able to defeat Apocalypse initially, after placing an enchantment on the battle axe Jarnbjorn, Thor is able to cut through the armor of Apocalypse and by extension, send Apocalypse into hibernation in order to recuperate. Now, while Apocalypse continues his pattern over the course of several hundred years by creating his own band of agents in the form of the Dark Riders, the most popular creation outside of any of his horsemen was the creation of Mr. Sinister. Initially a man by the name of Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister had been obsessed with the idea of human evolution. While mutants did exist during this time in the 1850s, most of these individuals were identified by their physical differences from normal humans, and in response, were usually isolated or else just simply kept in prisons. Using this as a way to attain these mutants for genetic testing, Mr. Sinister eventually found himself coming face to face with Apocalypse. Now, this is particularly important because this actually gave Apocalypse meaning, and in truth, would actually be the driving force behind his actions going forward. Prior to his encounter with Mr. Sinister, Apocalypse had wanted to believe that he was the beginning of a new generation of being, but because he had yet to encounter mutants, he had been leaning towards the idea that he was alone in his evolution. This combined with his desire to see the expansion of enhanced people in order to ensure only the strongest occupied the Earth, was guaranteed when he used his celestial technology to provide Mr. Sinister with powers of his own, including shape-shifting, immortality, and telekinesis. Following this, Apocalypse continued his various encounters around the world, which eventually led up to his initial introduction with X Factor issue number 5. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys later. Peace! check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So as we get into our final video on the Age of Apocalypse, what I want to do here is take some time to recap the events up to this point. As we discussed in our previous videos, the Mutant Legion, the son of Charles Xavier, traveled into the past under the belief that if he were to kill Magneto, it would create a more peaceful world for his father. Jumping in the way of the killing blow, Xavier dies rather than Magneto. And so what this does is it creates a fracture in the timeline, affording Apocalypse a chance to launch his campaign of world domination. Taking the opportunity to do so, the story of Age of Apocalypse picked up with Bishop traveling the city of Seattle, with Apocalypse having successfully taken over North America. Now, after a short battle between some of Apocalypse's henchmen and eventually coming into contact with Magneto, Bishop explains that this new timeline is not how things are supposed to be, and that all of this is due to the death of Charles Xavier. Now, after using the powers of Rogue to absorb Bishop's memories, Magneto forms a plan to assemble various artifacts from across this alternate universe to ensure the timeline goes back to normal. Gambit and his team will travel into space and capture a shard of the Mcron crystal, an artifact that has the power to reset reality. Colossus and Kitty Pryde would travel to the Seattle core to rescue Magic, or Ileana Rasputin, the sister of Colossus, who has the ability to travel into the past. And Nightcrawler would travel to the city of Avalon, the last safe haven for humans and mutants, where he'll enlist the aid of a woman named Destiny, who's actually a blind mutant with the ability to see into the future. Now, in addition to all of this, we learned that the mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister had been experimenting with the DNA of Jean Grey and Scott Summers to create a being powerful enough to topple Apocalypse. Following his creation and subsequent release into the world, Sinister eventually caught up with Nate Grey in an effort to see how his power was progressing. And so after Sinister manipulated the powers of Nate Grey and his emotions, Nate Grey sought to fulfill his purpose by destroying Apocalypse himself. Now, as the last piece of the puzzle, we learned that those humans who were most prominent in the main Marvel timeline, such as Tony Stark and others, existed as part of a group called the Human High Council. As the last vestiges of government in the world, they sought to end Apocalypse's regime. The feeling that this could only be accomplished with the use of nuclear weapons, the Human High Council used Wolverine and Jean Grey to begin a mass evacuation of all humans and mutants on the eastern seaboard in order to ensure minimal innocent casualties in the explosions should nuclear weapons become necessary. Now, with all these pieces moved into their final places, we pick up with the conclusion of the Age of Apocalypse. But I also want to let you guys know ahead of time that because this is a 90s story, things move incredibly fast throughout the end of this conflict. So picking up with Jean Grey, what we find is that her attempt to enter the domain of Apocalypse in an effort to assist the X-Men in overthrowing his rule has landed her in the pens where she's being experimented on by Dark Beast. However, with Scott Summers' ever-increasing desire to move away from the dark reign of Apocalypse, he ultimately turns on both his brother Havoc and Beast himself. Now, while Scott Summers is overpowered and held captive, Jean uses her abilities to remove his optic cover, allowing the full blast of his energy beams to be unleashed. And so what happens is Cyclops effectively takes out Beast and knocks Havoc unconscious, along with several other henchmen, and together, he and Jean Grey escape the immediate confines of the pens. Now from here, we transition to Magneto and Bishop. And what we learn is that following a breach in the security system, the two head outside to investigate, but realize that the mansion's actually under attack from some of Apocalypse's henchmen. Now, while the two are able to take these individuals out with minimal effort, this is all revealed to have been a ruse, as Apocalypse himself arrives to confront Magneto. Now, I'd like you guys to pay particular attention to this exchange because this will actually be a major focal point towards the end of the story in this event. But what Apocalypse tells Magneto is that while he leads this group of X-Men in the memory of Charles Xavier, that Magneto himself is inherently weak. While he was perceived to have been strong at one time, his willingness to cast aside his cunning and cruel behavior has also cost him the luxury of doing whatever it takes to succeed, even if it means the murder of innocent people. Now, while Apocalypse himself has no qualms with this behavior, what we'll find is that this sentiment will actually be turned on him. Now, in addition to all of this, Apocalypse takes notice of Bishop in his attempt to stop Apocalypse's attack on Magneto. Now, while this is the first encounter between Bishop and Apocalypse in this story, Apocalypse has learned through various reports and direct monitoring of Magneto's actions that Bishop is in fact a time traveler looking to correct the timeline. But what Apocalypse doesn't know is the extent of Bishop's information regarding the timeline, how it was changed, and the actions of Legion that led to this new reality. And so what Apocalypse says is that his telepaths will basically force their way into Bishop's mind and learn all the secrets that he has to offer. Now from here, we switch to the X-Men as they arrive following their evacuation of civilians and mutants to the safe zone in Europe, where they learn that Apocalypse has taken both Magneto and Bishop. Now realizing that the death of Magneto would mean certain doom for this reality, either by the success of Apocalypse in taking over the world, or the humans destroying North America with their nuclear weapons, the X-Men make the decision to confront Apocalypse head-on at his headquarters. Now continuing this trend, with all of these roads leading directly to an effort to confront Apocalypse, we transition to Scott Summers and Jean Grey again. Now continuing their way through the fortress in an effort to get away, the two eventually come upon Havoc and overhear orders to eliminate all of the mutants that are being held captive by Beast. Now with the two of them working together, they're actually able to orchestrate a blackout within the pens itself, taking all the power down to the entire facility. And so using the opportunity to rally the captive members to their side, Jean Grey and Scott Summers basically lead these individuals to freedom. And now again, continuing this trend of this story moving at a very fast pace, we transition to Gambit and his team of externals following their capture of a shard of the Mkron crystal. While the group was able to return to Earth with the shard in hand, what we learn is that there's actually a traitor among their ranks. After having been previously captured and forced to operate on Apocalypse's behalf, Guido, one of the members of the team, steals the shard of the Mkron crystal. Now realizing that treachery is afoot, Jubilee flees back to the X-Men mansion to alert Magneto. But when it's actually revealed that Magneto had previously been captured, she takes the son of Magneto and Rogue for protection, only to be confronted by Guido himself. And so overpowering Jubilee and taking the child, Guido hands both of them over to Apocalypse. And so at this point, we transition back to Magneto as the final conflict begins to come underway. While Magneto isn't really being held prisoner in the traditional sense that he's being chained to a cell, his prison is more of a prison of the mind, with Apocalypse and Holocaust, one of his horsemen, constantly taunting Magneto. However, the duo is met with the arrival of Nate Gray, and alongside Magneto, the two are able to confront both Apocalypse and Holocaust. Now in addition to this, the collective groups of Gambit and the Externals, the X-Men, and Bishop, having previously been rescued by the X-Men themselves, arrive as well, resulting in a full-scale battle in the heart of Apocalypse's citadel. While the group is able to distract Apocalypse, Magneto is able to speak directly with Illyana Rasputin alongside Bishop. While Illyana admits to not having any mutant powers, Magneto actually states that these powers are dormant and that with the Mkron crystal, she'll be able to access her abilities by watching various versions of herself using her powers. Now while it's not explicitly explained to us why it is this is able to happen, I would go as far as to say that this is simply just introduced to us for the sake of the story progressing and allowing some sort of conclusion to be written in. But after accessing her abilities directly, Illyana Rasputin opens a portal using the power of the Mkron crystal and sends Bishop into the past during the conflict between Legion, Xavier, and Magneto. Now picking up again with Scott Summers and Jean Grey, what we find is that Jean Grey uses her powers to realize that the humans have launched their nuclear weapons against North America. And so with 20 minutes left before detonation, we find that Jean Grey and Scott Summers are met with the arrival of Wolverine as well as Havoc. Now while Havoc and Wolverine do arrive separately, the fact remains that they each showed up chasing an individual. Havoc of course showed up chasing Cyclops, and Wolverine showed up trying to get Jean Grey to come back. But what we also learn here is that Jean Grey's been using her mental powers to effectively hold the nuclear weapons at bay. That while the nuclear weapons have been traveling, she's either been stopping them entirely or slowing them down in order to buy them more time. But with time running out very, very fast, Jean Grey attempts to intervene between the conflict of Cyclops and Havoc, and ultimately she's killed by Havoc. And so with his former lover killed, Wolverine retaliates by killing Havoc himself. And so from here what we learn is that with Jean Grey having been killed, that the timeline now officially starts. The timeline is at 20 minutes going forward until complete and total nuclear bombardment of North America. And so from here, we jump back to Bishop into the past. Confronting Legion before he kills Xavier, Bishop tells him that his actions will result in a modification of the timeline, one which destroys everything that Xavier had stood for. Now while Legion is very skeptical of this, and Legion's actually ingrained in his attitude of believing that he can genuinely change time, what Bishop does is he takes Legion's power and forces Legion to read the mind of Bishop. And when he does, Legion realizes that the Age of Apocalypse will come to fruition, that the actions of Legion will not make a better future for Charles Xavier, but instead will lead to the death of Charles Xavier and a dystopian future. And so realizing that his actions would be in the negative, Legion effectively relents and gives up his quest. And so at this point, what we do is we jump back to the main Age of Apocalypse event happening itself. And with Charles Xavier having never died trying to save Magneto from Legion, the Age of Apocalypse corrects itself and turns into an alternate reality. And so with around 5 minutes left before detonation, the conflict between the combined forces of the X-Men and Apocalypse comes to a head when Apocalypse attempts to kill Magneto by choking him to death. And so focusing on his powers, Magneto actually kills Apocalypse by ripping his body in half in one of the most infamous scenes of the series. And so what this does is this basically again takes the idea of Apocalypse's belief system of survival of the fittest and flips it on its head, that now Apocalypse is the one who was effectively found wanting, where Magneto was the one who came out on top. And so with the forces of Apocalypse disbanding and running for the hills, we ultimately join Magneto, their son Charles, and Rogue as they are basically gathered together waiting for the nuclear bombs to strike, which at the end of the story they do, presumably leaving us with the idea that the Age of Apocalypse has been destroyed entirely. With that being said, I know this story went by very, very fast, but that's simply because of how it was written. The idea of the Age of Apocalypse is very fast moving once it gets to the conclusion. And because it's a 1990s story, there's really not much we can do. So thank you guys for being part of this, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.
Now you don't have to be when you go here. It's the newest way to take.
Be sure to...
While other insurance companies just see a car, we see something you've worked really hard for. So why not give it the protection it deserves?
Be sure to check out my second channel called Rob
LinkedIn
Explains.
Learning.
There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So what I wanted to do here is have a discussion about the Red Lantern Corps. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of why the group came into existence, and more importantly, why fans love them so much. In 1994, with the removal of Hal Jordan as the Green Lantern and his replacement at the hands of Kyle Rayner, DC had found that fan reaction among Hal Jordan fans following this decision was one of intense negativity. While Kyle Rayner would go on to introduce a new generation of readers to the Green Lantern mythos, many previous readers felt betrayed in seeing Hal Jordan, arguably the most iconic Green Lantern, depicted in a manner that caused him to succumb to fear, lose his sanity, and eventually die. While DC made multiple attempts to correct this depiction of Hal Jordan and shine his death in a more favorable light, DC's unwillingness to return him to the position of the premier Green Lantern in their continuity maintained this line of demarcation regarding hardcore Hal Jordan fans and their willingness to buy into this new line of titles. As a result, with sales in a decline following Kyle Rayner's introduction, in 2004, Jeff Johns was brought on board in an effort to launch a campaign that would see Hal Jordan restored to the DC landscape as the premier Green Lantern. And to this end, Jeff Johns began taking steps to expand the Green Lantern mythos over the course of a series of stories that would become known as the Jeff Johns Green Lantern Epic. In a 2013 interview with Comic Book Resources following the conclusion of his run on the Green Lantern series, Jeff Johns had stated that his inspiration for launching this new series of stories had its roots in his personal experiences and personal losses, as well as the events surrounding September 11, 2001. With much of the United States gripped in fear following this event, as well as the personal ramifications for him, Jeff Johns took to using the Green Lantern series as an outlet for his feelings and perceptions of the power of emotion and self-analysis. Beginning with the introduction of the Blackest Night prophecy and its telling of a war between all lanterns of the emotional spectrum, Jeff Johns took the next step of establishing that with the Green Lanterns powered by willpower, and with the Sinestro Corps powered by fear, these groups existed as only part of the emotional spectrum. Alongside these two previously established teams existed new groups of Lantern Corps consisting of the Blue Lanterns powered by hope, the Orange Lantern powered by avarice or greed, the Indigo Lanterns powered by compassion, the previously existing Star Sapphires powered by love, the White Lanterns powered by life, the Black Lanterns powered by death, and finally, the Red Lanterns powered by rage. So while the origins of the Red Lanterns were initially provided over the course of Jeff Johns' original run, because the Red Lanterns had received their own solo series with the New 52, and because their origin doesn't change from the original, what we're going to do is reference Red Lanterns issue number 0 as well as several other sources in order to establish this complete backstory over the course of the pre-New 52 and the New 52 continuities. What we're told here is that the history of the Red Lantern Corps predates the Green Lantern Corps itself, and that when the Guardians of the Universe had launched their campaign to provide a police force for the cosmos, their first attempt came in the form of the robotic Manhunters. Designed for the purpose now served by the Green Lanterns, a programming glitch occurred causing the Manhunters to believe that in order for peace to exist in the universe, it would have to be devoid of all life. Beginning a conquest of various planets, their efforts eventually led them to Sector 666. Attacking the planets and killing virtually all occupants, the Manhunters left failing to realize that 5 individuals had survived the massacre, one of which was a being named Atrocitus. Fueled by their rage over the loss of their races, their friends, and their families, combined with the belief that the Guardians of the Universe were responsible, but lacking leadership, the group elected Atrocitus to oversee their operations. Undertaking the name of the 5 Inversions, the group spends centuries waging war against the Guardians of the Universe. Destroying countless Manhunters in their quest, the group establishes what's called the Empire of Tears, an affiliation of worlds powered by their rage and hatred of the Guardians. Eventually manipulating and becoming romantically involved with one of the other 5 Inversions, Atrocitus learns the power of the Blood Prophecy, the ability to kill others and use their blood in a manner that allows for glances into the future. Capturing one of the Guardians and killing him, Atrocitus puts this magic to use by peering into the future and seeing the other members of the 5 Inversions dead with himself atop an ocean of blood. Realizing that the prophecy is telling him of his ascension to power, Atrocitus kills the 5 Inversions. Collecting their power unto himself by way of a blood magic ritual, he forms a Red Power Battery, the source of power for the Red Lantern Corps. With this newfound power, Atrocitus sends rings throughout the universe. Much like the other power rings, the Red Lantern rings select those best suited to wield them, but due to the basis behind their creation, the Red Power rings seek out those whose hearts are filled with rage. As is described to us, when an individual accepts and falls under the power of a Red Lantern ring, virtually all semblance of their former selves are erased. Driven by their rage on a mind-consuming level, most wielders of the Red Lantern rings are virtually mindless, casting aside all sense of morality and decency to defeat their various foes. So following the introduction of the Red Lantern Corps, fans immediately latched onto the idea. Where the history of the Red Lantern continuity has largely consisted of battles between the Green Lantern Corps and Sinestro's Yellow Lantern Corps, with occasional appearances by the Star Sapphires, fans welcome the idea of a more expansive continuity involving a multitude of new Lantern Corps. In addition to this, the existence of the Red Lanterns as a result of past failures regarding the Guardians of the Universe provided a richer continuity. Previously, the failures of the Guardians largely involved their casting out of Hal Jordan, or else the byproduct of their strict standards of universal perception. With the Red Lanterns, however, this capitalized on the idea that the failures of the Guardians had far-reaching consequences affecting not just themselves, but the universe as a whole. Furthermore, the Red Lantern Corps, driven by rage and being introduced as the antithesis to the Green Lantern's willpower, provided readers with battles of discipline versus mindlessness, and with the Red Lanterns consisting of beings not constrained by concepts like morality, these battles took a break away from the tradition of foes pummeling one another with hard-like constructs and instead often introduced bloody fights with former members of the Green or Sinestro Lantern Corps falling from grace, so to speak, and joining the Red Lanterns themselves. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So with many fans claiming to have seen Eternity in the Ant-Man film, and with director Peyton Reed stating that this is one of the many possibilities, what I want to do here is have a discussion on his character. And what I'm hoping is that by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of his role in the Marvel Universe, and more importantly, why the appearance of Eternity is such a big deal. So because I can't find any information for why it was that Eternity was made, I decided that I would throw my opinion in here with regards to his creation. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and initially appearing in Strange Tales issue number 138 in September of 1965, Eternity was the first being introduced in Marvel Comics as a cosmic entity. While the Stranger did appear a few months prior and seemed to exist on a cosmic level, his initial introduction came with no information regarding his purpose or role in Marvel Comics aside from collecting powerful individuals for study. Because the Strange Tales series was a way for Marvel to introduce Doctor Strange and by extension, delve into Eastern culture and concepts of mysticism, and with the Silver Age of comics rapidly expanding the lineup of Earthbound characters like Captain America, Iron Man, and Spider-Man, the stories of Doctor Strange provided Marvel with the best outlet regarding the introduction of strange and interesting concepts, as well as expanding on the Marvel Universe beyond the planet Earth. In addition to this, when looking back at Marvel's introduction of heroes, villains, and a multitude of concepts, a kind of organization is always established in terms of groups, who belongs and doesn't belong to those groups, and the purpose that all things serve. As an example, all mutants are either part of the X-Men or in some capacity consistently deal with the X-Men. Take for example the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants or Factor 3, both of which exist as allies and enemies to the X-Men team. Conversely, the purpose of mutants in relation to us as the reader is how they cope with the struggle of various forms of oppression at the hands of religious groups, hate groups, and even the federal government. Non-mutant beings with superpowers follow the same pattern encompassing the Avengers or some variation therein like the Defenders, and deal with their own issues ranging from global threats to humanitarian efforts. With this in mind, it would stand to reason that if Marvel was going to introduce a pantheon of cosmic beings, these de facto gods would have to have a ranking system of most powerful to least powerful, have some measure of relatability, and serve a purpose in and of themselves. And to this end, Eternity exists as the most powerful cosmic entity in the Marvel Universe, with a different version existing in each of the universes of Marvel's multiverse. Representing all that encompasses the universe, from individuals to planets to galaxies and everything in between, Eternity also represents the passage of time from the point the universe came into existence to the point at which it would meet its end, whenever that happened to be. As a byproduct of this, while each version of Eternity in their respective universe has incredible power, they're actually a result of their own universe's formation. What this means is that with the Infinity Gauntlet's ability to control all facets of the universe, for example, this means that the person wielding the Infinity Gauntlet has the ability to overpower and control Eternity itself. Think about it this way. If the universe is a glass of water, Eternity represents the water in the glass. A person wielding the Infinity Gauntlet can manipulate that glass of water by changing its shape, eliminating part of it, or in some capacity, manipulating it. So Marvel doesn't make it easy for us to decipher the origin of Eternity in the mainstream Marvel Universe. Because there is no singular story of how everything came into existence, what we're going to have to do here is delve into different stories from different characters. Starting with Adventures of the X-Men issue number 12, Marvel establishes that all of the characters that exist in the current reality referred to as Earth 616 existed in the previous reality designated Earth 0. While we're not given an in-depth explanation of what this continuity was like, what we are told is that at some point, a being called the Dweller in Darkness, a demon that fed off the fear of others, created a fracture in the M'Kraan crystal, the nexus of all realities in the multiverse. With the energies expanding at an uncontrollable rate and knowing that this would lead to the destruction of the Earth Zero continuity, the Dweller in Darkness sought to feed on the fear of the inhabitants with the ending of the universe in order to be born into the Earth 616 universe with absolute power. In an effort to keep this from happening, but with the destruction of the universe unavoidable, the Phoenix Force of Earth Zero bound all minds together in peace, rendering the Dweller in Darkness completely powerless. From here, we jump to the Mighty Thor Volume 1, issue number 169. What we're told is that at the same time that the Dweller in Darkness was being defeated, a being named Galen was attempting to discover the reason for why the Earth serial continuity was ending. While Galen had attributed its destruction to a force he couldn't identify or comprehend, and with the universe collapsing in on itself, Thanos Volume 1 issue number 3 tells us that the Earth Zero version of Eternity placed Galen in a cocoon of sorts that allowed him to be reborn into Earth 616. Once the ending of the Earth Zero continuity completed and the Earth 616 universe came into existence, all of this reality was formed, and with it came both Galactus as well as Eternity, the embodiment of all there is. So as a representation of the universe itself, Eternity is an essential part of the Marvel cosmology. While a hands-on approach almost never happens, events like Infinity Gauntlet require Eternity to act since the survival of the universe itself was perceived to be at stake. However, from time to time, Eternity will act on behalf of individuals even when the outcome has no detrimental effect on the universe. As an example, during the trial of Reed Richards in Fantastic Four issue number 262, Galactus had previously helped the Fantastic Four defeat a being named Terrax. Drained of his energies and nearly starving, Reed provided Galactus with the sustenance necessary to live. The result was that because Galactus consumes worlds, has killed billions of people, and will continue to do so, Reed is put on trial for allowing Galactus to live. Appearing in order to provide those involved with an understanding of how the universe works, Eternity provides everyone with cosmic awareness, allowing them to realize that Galactus is an intricate part of the universe itself, and that his existence is a necessity, regardless of the number of people that he kills. Now, in terms of the Marvel films, we know that Eternity was one of the beings responsible for creating the Infinity Stones, as was explained in Guardians of the Galaxy. The suspected appearance of Eternity in Ant-Man provides us with a couple of important facts. The first is that Thanos' possession of the Infinity Gauntlet would have universe-wide effects, and the second is that it establishes a much larger continuity involving the Macroverse and possibly even the Living Tribunal. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So what I wanted to do here is have a discussion about DC's Kingdom Come. And what I'm hoping is that by the end of all of this, you'll have an understanding of why this story was written, and why so many consider it to be one of the best DC stories ever told. So the story of Kingdom Come actually has its roots in the Marvel Comics story Marvels, written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Alex Ross. Where Marvel stories usually take place from the perspective of the superhero or supervillain involved, Marvels took place from the perspective of a normal human named Phil Sheldon as he chronicled the actions of superheroes from World War II up until the 1980s. In a 2006 interview with Wizard Entertainment, Alex Ross had stated that during his time working on Marvels, the idea came to him to expand this concept to DC Comics. Following his departure from Marvel in 1996, Alex Ross followed through with this idea alongside writer Mark Waid by introducing the four-part story, Kingdom Come. Like all titles published under the DC Elseworlds banner, Kingdom Come focuses on DC superheroes outside of any previously established continuity and exists as a self-contained story. Following a religious minister named Norman McKay, who was created explicitly for this story, Kingdom Come centers on a world where DC's iconic heroes find themselves wrapped up in a civil war against a new generation of heroes, which brings the world to the brink of complete destruction. So the story of Kingdom Come picks up with Norman McKay as he's reading biblical scripture to a man named Wesley Dodds. As one of DC's older superheroes dating back to 1939, in the normal DC continuity, Wesley Dodds goes by the name of Sandman and has prophetic dreams that allow him to see crimes that criminals will commit before they happen. Armed with a gun that emits a sleeping gas of sorts, Wesley Dodds would subdue criminals and take them in as they were preparing to commit their crime, but before they could act. However, in the Kingdom Come series, Wesley Dodds is dying of old age, but has apocalyptic visions of the world's end. While these visions aren't necessarily clear, what Wesley is able to discern is that this apocalypse will come about as a result of a superhuman civil war. While Wesley attempts to alert Norman of the impending disaster, Norman considers these to be largely due to Wesley experiencing bouts of insanity or hallucinations as a result of being near death. And so as the story continues, Norman gives us an explanation of the world as it exists at the time. And what we're told is that the heroes of old, that is to say Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of DC's top-tier heroes, have basically left. In their place exists a new breed of hero engaging in battles with one another and with villains without any regard for the safety of citizens. As a result, these battles are often violent, ending with massive property destruction and casualties. While the reason behind why these heroes of old are no longer acting is left ambiguous, the backstory is provided when Norman McKay receives a visit from the Spectre. While this is a character that we've never discussed, the Spectre exists as the Hand of God in DC Comics, carrying out his will and plea. To this end, the Spectre selects Norman McKay to assist in judging the superheroes of Earth to determine who should be allowed to live and who should be allowed to die. Taking us on a journey, the Spectre and Norman McKay reveal that 10 years prior, the Joker had murdered 93 people at the Daily Planet, including Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane. While the Joker was captured by authorities, on the day of his trial he was murdered by a vigilante named Magog. Because of the gruesome nature of the Joker's crime, coupled with society's desire to see justice done, rather than calling for Magog to be held accountable for his act, humanity praised him for what they perceived as a willingness to do what needed to be done. Realizing that humanity seemed to cast aside its desire for justice and instead embrace vigilantism, Superman walked away, leaving the human community to deal with Magog and his undisciplined heroes that were inspired to act in the same vigilante tactics. Furthermore, because Superman was viewed as an icon among so many heroes in the DC universe, individuals like Aquaman, Alan Scott, the Green Lantern of Earth, as well as others abandoned their roles as superheroes and retreated to lives of solitude. However, when a group of heroes and villains engage in a battle on one of the bridges of Metropolis, Superman arrives, having apparently abandoned his solitude and returned to restore order to the world. From here, the story temporarily shifts away from the perspective of Norman McKay and focuses on Superman. What we learn is that during the time in which Superman was in solitude, he was approached by Wonder Woman. In an effort to coax Superman back into action, Wonder Woman had him watch newsreels on the effects of damages that had been taking place in Kansas. During a conflict between Parasite and Magog along with his forces, Magog had expressed an unnecessary amount of violence. The result was that one of the superheroes was effectively ripped open. Due to the fact that his body was composed of a litany of atoms, which basically made him an atomic bomb, this set off a massive explosion and resulted in the complete destruction of Kansas as an entirety, as well as the surrounding states of Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. From here, the story switches back to the present, and with Superman as he begins to rally former heroes together in an effort to confront and end the reign of Magog. While Superman is able to bring together the Flash, Power Girl, Hawkman, Wonder Woman, and others, the one person missing from this lineup, and perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle, is Batman. Visiting Bruce Wayne in what's left of Wayne Manor, Bruce reveals that the mansion was attacked by the combined efforts of Two-Face and Bane following Superman's departure and the implementation of lawlessness in the United States. In addition, Arkham Asylum, Blackgate Prison, and Bella Reef Prison were all destroyed, with its inmates either escaping or being killed in the process. While Superman attempts to enlist the aid of Batman, Bruce Wayne states that he has no intention of joining Superman. The reason for this is because the superhuman population exploded after Superman left. Rather than staying on and being a role model for these new heroes in order to teach them the manner in which they should operate and to confront foes and preserve order, Superman allowed them to become feral, with no true understanding of what it means to be heroes. Furthermore, Batman argues that Superman's position will only incite more violence because he is effectively imposing his will on other heroes. And so rather than taking a stance of physical force, Batman suggests that Superman take a more diplomatic role. And so with both sides at a complete stalemate, Superman departs, and following this, Batman reveals that Oliver Queen, Black Canary, and others exist as a sort of team serving the purpose of providing Batman with information on the world outside of Gotham. At this point, the story begins to spiral out of control. While Superman makes his efforts to acquire as many heroes as possible, Batman does the same. Operating as opposing forces, Superman's approach of attempting to force heroes to join the Justice League results in massive rebellions and several battles. Placing those who refuse to convert into a prison established in the middle of Kansas, Superman finds that there are actually more prisoners than there are free heroes on the planet Earth. Conversely, Batman allies himself with Lex Luthor, forming a coalition to mass-produce robots that are capable of fighting these superheroes and quell all superhuman activity on Earth. And so the conflict between the two groups, both Batman and Superman as well as humanity and supervillains, comes to a head when a riot breaks out at the Kansas prison. With superhumans fighting one another and with minimal protection, the Justice League rallies in an effort to stop the riot and restore order. However, woefully outmatched by sheer numbers, Superman's attempts to do what he can is met with the arrival of Shazam. Transitioning back to Norman McKay and Spectre, we get this incredible dialogue as Norman watches the massive battle unfold with all parties involved. Realizing that this could very well mean the end of the world, Norman describes its scene in incredible detail. Analyzing Superman's predicament and discussing his confusion on how things could have gotten this bad, what Norman realizes is that despite Superman's vast powers and the conflict and desire to bring order to the world, Superman failed to realize that leadership is just as much about diplomacy as it is about physical force. The new generation of heroes founded under Magog aren't a group that are inherently evil, and instead, they're simply undisciplined. Raised in a world that was unable to differentiate between justice and vigilantism, the new breed of heroes were simply emulating the actions of the only true role model they had. And so with Batman's forces joining the fray and the line between hero and vigilante becoming ever blurred, in their panic, humanity launches a nuclear warhead at the battle site. At this point, we transition to the Spectre. Presenting one of the best questions in the entire story, the Spectre instructs Norman to choose who will be judged. If the bomb is stopped by Superman, the superhumans will live, but their existence will lead to a war that will destroy the Earth eventually. However, if the bomb is not stopped, humanity will survive, but superheroes will be wiped out in their entirety. While either choice will present a genocide, the Spectre tells Norman McKay to choose who is responsible for this entire situation, humanity or the superhumans. Now what I want to do is I want to take a break away from the story for a second, and the reason why is because I think this is one of the most important moments in the story, because an argument can be made on both sides. While this is a battle of superhumans, and Superman could have taken a different approach that would have prevented this from happening, at the same time, humanity chose to ally itself with a vigilante, failing to notice that Magog's actions weren't a willingness to do what needed to be done in support of humanity, but instead, they were done in spite of humanity. Now jumping back into things, the sentiment of Norman McKay is further expanded on when Superman stops the battle between himself and Shazam. Realizing that the nuclear blast will kill all those present save for only a handful of individuals, the Superman instructs Shazam to make a decision. Because Shazam's human alter ego is Billy Batson, allowing him to live as both superhuman and normal human, either Shazam can stop Superman and allow the bomb to drop, or Shazam can allow Superman to stop the bomb. Choosing a third option, Shazam incapacitates Superman, intercepts the bomb, and detonates it, killing himself in the process. And so in the ensuing destruction and believing himself to be the sole survivor, Superman travels to the United Nations bent on revenge and punishing humanity for their decision to kill so many people. Pleading with the Spectre to take him to intervene, Norman McKay arrives and talks Superman down, stating that Superman allowed his grief over the death of Lois Lane and humanity's willingness to cast out justice to basically drive him away. And somewhere along the line, Superman forgot that more important than any hero or human is the sanctity of life. Realizing the value in Norman's words, Superman relents. And so as the story begins to come to a close, Superman states that where previously they had operated in a manner that imposed their will on humanity, instead they will simply lead humanity in the hopes that this new era will create a lasting peace on the planet Earth. So following its release, Kingdom Come was met with universal acclaim. Praised for its artwork and philosophical look at the traditional role of superheroes, Kingdom Come is considered one of the greatest DC stories of all time. In a review published in 2013, the Comics Authority points out that the beauty of Kingdom Come is that it points to everything that's both amazing and complicated about the DC universe. Praising Mark Waid's lattice work of intermingling plots and presenting a confrontation between Batman and Superman composed of ideals rather than physical battles, the Comics Authority sums up the story quite well in stating that Kingdom Come presents a series of events reminding Earth's heroes that their responsibility is not to protect humans or engage in self-gratification, it's simply to inspire hope. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So what I wanted to do here is have a discussion about the difference between the negative zone and the end zone in Marvel Comics. The reason for this is that with the Fantastic Four film pulling heavily from the Ultimate Universe, and because the Ultimate Universe is a reimagining of various characters and teams from the mainstream Marvel Universe, I feel like some explanation is necessary regarding how the negative zone and the end zone relate to one another, and how they pertain to various adventures and escapades of the Fantastic Four. And so the best way to think of the negative zone is that it exists as a parallel reality to the mainstream Marvel Universe. First appearing in Fantastic Four number 51, the negative zone was discovered accidentally by Reed Richards. While Marvel doesn't give us much in terms of its initial discovery, what we're told is that following the attempt by Galactus to consume the planet Earth, and his defeat by the combined efforts of Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four in issues number 46 through 48, Reed rationalized that because of the vast powers available to Galactus as well as other threats that may exist in the universe, the heroes of Earth were largely unprepared or incapable of combating such a threat. In order to ensure the safety of the planet, Reed wanted to have a way to send these threats to another dimension should they ever become a danger to Earth and all life within. To this end, Reed developed a device that allowed trans-dimensional travel, and in his efforts to discover alternate realities, stumbled upon the negative zone. Now, in terms of characteristics, what Marvel tells us is that the negative zone is called this because all matter within is negatively charged. To clear this up a bit, all objects, including the molecules that make up the negative zone itself, are composed of antimatter. If a person or object were to attempt to enter the negative zone, they would have to reverse the polarity of their molecular structure. What this means is that with all matter outside of the negative zone composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons, antimatter is composed of the opposite, which are antiprotons, antineutrons, and positrons. Without a reverse in polarity, upon entrance, the antiprotons, antineutrons, and positrons that make up the negative zone would cancel out the protons, neutrons, and electrons that make up normal matter, and the object or person would simply cease to exist. Now, the reversing of an object or person's molecular polarity happens automatically when they pass through the fabric of infinity, or as it's sometimes called, the distortion zone. Once past this area, they next enter the space between realities. While no name is given to this area, in Fantastic Four number 51, when Reed entered this space, he described it as a four-dimensional universe that he could only observe in 3 dimensions. This resulted in the space around him appearing as nonsensical shapes and eventually massive stretches of light. Now, assuming a person is able to make it through all of this, what they would find in the negative zone is a universe relatively similar to our own, but different at the same time. As it's explained in Fantastic Four number 253, the negative zone is a universe far older than the mainstream Marvel continuity, and that is actually approaching its own destruction. In Fantastic Four number 319, this is expanded on when it's revealed that while the universe came into existence by way of a Big Bang, as time passed, the universe began to stop growing and instead began to close in on itself. While the reason behind this is not explicitly given to us, I would argue that this is simply the result of the gravitational pull of all objects within the negative zone pulling towards one another. Now, within the center of the negative zone is a massive black hole, and within the core of this black hole is what's referred to as the crossroads of infinity. Like walking through a hallway of doors, if a person were to travel into the black hole and withstand the extreme tidal forces, they could actually enter other realities in the Marvel Universe, which points towards the fact that there's only one negative zone in the entire Marvel multiverse. Now, in terms of all the space outside of the black hole, most of this is simply uncharted. However, over the course of various Fantastic Four stories, Marvel provides us with backstories on some of these races. In Fantastic Four issue number 140, for example, we get a limited explanation on a race called the Tyannans. Presented as the first race to come into existence in the negative zone, their evolution led them to a point of technological advancement where they began to look towards the stars. But seeing it as their destiny to spread their race across the negative zone and seed other worlds to evolve on their own, the ship carrying these spores was struck by an asteroid, and as a result, it crashed on a barren planet. Now, out of these spores grew an insectoid being who would eventually become Annihilus, the famed enemy of the Fantastic Four, who would attempt several invasions of the mainstream Marvel continuity but fail each time. After evolving and seeking out the ship previously belonging to the Tyannans, Annihilus found that the race had actually gone extinct, but using their technology, Annihilus was able to develop an object called the Cosmic Control Rod. While the rod has the power to manipulate the energies of the negative zone for virtually any purpose, Annihilus only really uses it to keep himself young in an effort to stave off death. Now, in addition to the evolution of Annihilus, the actions of the Tyannans also gave us the Bellurians. While nothing's really known about